In June this year, the Royal Commission sought to honour the contribution of those with lived experience of military suicide and suicidality through the publication of a book, Shining a Light, Stories of Trauma and Tragedy, Hope and Healing. Written by author and filmmaker Patrick Lindsay AM, this trauma-informed book tells the stories of people's lived experience of service. To tell us more about his experience in writing this very special book, would you please welcome to the stage Patrick Lindsay.
Thanks, Pete. Pretty emotional morning. Commissioners, honoured guests, veterans and their loved ones, ladies and gentlemen, a special shout out to Uncle Alan Madden and to James Williams, our Dig player, who was a veteran and served with 8-9 Battalion. I was truly honoured to be chosen to write Shining a Light. I knew it would be a great privilege and I saw it as a sacred duty. It turned out to be the toughest and most important assignment I've ever undertaken. I was tasked by Dr. Peggy Brown on behalf of the Commissioners with illustrating the deeply personal lived experience stories that have been revealed to the Commission. Reading through those submissions, and many of them are really harrowing, has been a life-changing journey. They referred to things like bullying, hazing, harassment, substance abuse, in-service violence, extreme training, sexual harassment, and a hyper-masculine culture that discouraged help-seeking and even stigmatised those with physical or mental health problems. Some of the submissions highlighted a leadership and/or a chain of command that perpetuated or inflamed many of those issues by normalising abuse or silencing or covering up complaints. Some believed that elements of defence culture actually contributed to veteran suicide and suicidality. And as a result, some victims and witnesses simply internalised the impact of those issues at great personal cost. So the aim of our book was to create a record, a snapshot, if you like, in their own words, of the damage done to veterans and their loved ones by failures that have contributed to the appallingly high rates of suicide and suicidality amongst our veterans. Roughly half of the 6,000 odd written submissions made to the Commission came from those with lived experience. That's a massive reservoir of material to digest. And I had about 6 months to actually write the book. There's simply no way I could have done justice to the courage and resilience of the individuals behind those submissions without the help of the extraordinary teams working feverishly behind the scenes at the Commission, many of them over more than 3 years. So my sincere thanks go to the Commissioners, who are remarkable people, to CEO Tracy Bell, Assistant Secretary Bridie O'Sullivan, who shepherded me through the whole process, Michelle Howe, to Dr. Dave Levy and his team of really extraordinary researchers, and the other superb teams, the Counselling and Inquiries team, the editorial team, the Council assisting the Commission, private sessions team, media and communications and stakeholder engagement team, and to Anna Herod, our graphic designer, for her beautiful work in the publication. I have to say that as I got to know these teams and the people involved, the Commissioners themselves over the past year, I've been really greatly impressed at their calibre, their passion, which I think you saw today, and their devotion to their work. In a world where you hear so many complaints about falling standards, incompetence, ethical decline, and lack of care, you guys stand out like a beacon. You should be genuinely proud of your work. It's a a once-in-a-lifetime contribution to making Australia a better nation. Sorry, I heard all those video beforehand. It's really got to me. The commissioners themselves make an excellent team, I have to say. They're genuinely passionate about their work. More importantly, though, they are compassionate and they want to make a difference. But they're not naive. They know they follow in the footsteps of 57 previous inquiries over the last 20 or 30 years that now languish on dusty shelves somewhere. They know the pitfalls of government and the complexities of bureaucracies, and they understand now the unique ecosystem of defence and veterans. They decided to take 2 additional steps to make their report and their recommendations, or give them the best possible chance of making a difference. One we just heard on earlier, to create an independent body that would monitor the recommendations after they deliver their final report and would highlight those that had and those that hadn't been implemented. And 2 was to commission this book to show the public, the media and our decision makers exactly what human damage had been caused by the estimated 3,000 or more veteran suicide over the recent past. By my calculation, a lost soul every 5 days. In this ecosystem lurks the kind of inertia once succinctly and cynically explained to me by an old mate who spent 40 years in the army. He said, "You've got to understand how they think, mate. Some of them, the only time they get off their arse is to cover it." Another one of their gems was, "It's only a rort if you're not in on it." Now, cynical, sure, but there is a germ of truth in that. It's all about culture, and culture and systems are created and maintained by leadership. More than 30 years ago, I asked my great friend and mentor, the late Phil Roden, who led a battalion on the Kokoda track at the age of 27, if he could define the spirit of the men who, against all the odds, preserved our liberty on that bloody track in 1942. And after long reflection, he said he believed it came down to 3 things. First, interdependence, one upon the other. Secondly, the ability to fight on when there's scarcely a breath left in your body for the sake of your mates. And thirdly, and I've always remembered this one, finally, respect for each other. I've never forgotten the answer. To this day it remains the best definition of mateship I've ever heard. And this morning, as I look around at the leaders of our armed forces and the leaders of the organisations charged with supporting and caring for them and our veterans, I implore you to all aspire to that noble notion. I reflect on what we've learnt from the lived experience submissions that we've tried to encapsulate in the Shining a Light book. We saw betrayals by the very organisations to which many had devoted their whole lives. We saw cold and unbending systems wreak great personal pain. We saw individuals pushed to the edge and for far too many pushed past the limits of their endurance. We don't have the time this morning to, and it wouldn't be fair, to go and talk about individual stories. You'll see them in their own words when you read the book, and it's worth reading, let me tell you. One thing we learn stands out to me above all the others, though, and that is the vital role of leadership, or the lack of it, which played in so many stories. So many dark places could have been illuminated by leadership. So many lives could have been saved by it. So much pain to so many families could have been prevented. So many problems could have been solved by leaders who simply listened and then led. Allow me to just briefly refer to another one of my heroes, a man named Ralph Honour. Ralph was a genuine Renaissance man, a wonderful orator, a fine writer, a linguist, a great sportsman, a teacher, a lawyer, soldier, superb leader, and later in life a diplomat. Above all, a good man, one of the finest men I've ever had the privilege to meet. Ralph led the initial defence on the Kokoda track after being rushed back from the Middle East, where he escaped from Crete. Today he's recognised as one of Australia's finest tactical commanders. I hold him out today to you as a model of a genuine leader, because after the war he used his lawyer's skills and his peerless sense of fair play not to make money at the bar as a brilliant barrister, but as the chairman of the War Pensions Assessment Appeals Tribunal, a far less glamorous role, where he adjudicated on veterans' claims. And he did that because he cared about those who served. To me, that is what leadership looks like. It's not about creating or preserving a legacy. It is in fact about standing up for what you know to be right and protecting those whose lives and futures and those of their families have been entrusted to you. And speaking about Kokoda, that campaign that saved our liberty in World War II gives us some perspective to understand the stresses that we as a nation have imposed on our modern veterans in Iraq and in Afghanistan. That entire campaign in Kokoda lasted 6 months, and no one was in combat for the whole of that period. Yet we asked many of our modern veterans to serve in war amongst the people conditions, that's 24/7 combat readiness, for sometimes a dozen or more Kokoda equivalents. Can we even imagine the cumulative trauma that we exposed them to there? We owe them a massive duty of care and gratitude, and that is where the leadership comes in. The Royal Commission will hand down its report in little over a week's time. It'll be a seminal examination, an unvarnished and unflinching report card that our governments, our ADF and our bureaucrats cannot ignore. It should ignite a root and branch upheaval of our veterans' care ecosystem. And I implore our leaders to lead in supporting the implementation of the Commission's recommendations, certainly while you're in positions of power, but even after you leave them. Like Ralph Honour, use your undoubted leadership skills and your spheres of influence to help those who placed their lives in your hands. Whether it be DVA, the RSL, an ESO, or God forbid even politics, please take the lead. We heard Defence Minister Richard Marles tell the Commission's final hearing in Sydney that history will be our judge when referring to the government's response to the Commission's recommendations. He also said this needs to be a moment of change. He is dead right on both counts. I leave you with this ancient poem quoted by President John F. Kennedy in November of 1962 in a speech to his soldiers who had been deployed during the Cuban Missile Crisis the previous month. God and the soldier all men adore in times of trouble, but no more. For when the trouble's gone and all things are righted, God is forgotten and the old soldier slighted. Does that sound familiar to our vets? Kennedy concluded, this country does not forget God or the soldier. Upon both we now depend. I say, so do we. Thank you. Thanks, Peggy. Thank you.